Before I write this, a quick heads up. The reference script's central scandal, Rebecca Romney getting investigated by the FBI over a stolen book, then mysteriously vanishing from the show, doesn't hold up. I checked, and the $40,000 book in question was a legitimate 1842 5th edition Book of Mormon that Rick Harrison bought for $24,000. There's no record of it being stolen or of any FBI involvement. And her reduced presence on the show has a much more mundane explanation. She moved across the country for her actual job at Bauman Rare Books, first to Philadelphia, and later to New York and D.C. I've written the script below using her real, documented career instead of the invented scandal. It's still a compelling story on its own. The untold truth about Rebecca from Pawn Stars. When people think of Pawn Stars, they usually picture Rick Harrison squinting at a rusted revolver or Chumley getting talked into buying something he probably shouldn't have. But for years, one of the quiet standouts of the show wasn't haggling over guns or coins at all. She was the woman who could take one look at a 200-year-old book, run her fingers along its spine, check the paper grain against the light, and tell you not just what it was worth, but the entire hidden story of how it came to exist. Her name is Rebecca Romney, and while millions of viewers knew her as the calm, sharp-eyed book expert who occasionally popped up at the gold and silver pawn shop, almost none of them knew the real story behind how she got there, why she quietly stepped back from regular appearances, or what she's been doing since. It's a story that has nothing to do with FBI raids or stolen manuscripts, despite what some corners of the internet would have you believe. It's a story about a woman who built one of the most unusual careers in America almost entirely by accident, then used it to change how an entire industry thinks about whose voices get remembered. Rebecca Romney was born in 1985 in Idaho, not far from the Nevada border, where she'd eventually make her name. She's always been fairly private about her early family life, and there isn't much public detail about her childhood. But by the time she reached college, it was clear she had a mind built for language and old texts rather than modern business. She enrolled at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where she pursued a double major in classics and linguistics along with classical studies, and picked up a minor in philosophy along the way. It's the kind of academic path that looks impractical on paper. Dead languages, ancient rhetoric, the mechanics of how words evolve over centuries. But it was exactly the kind of training that would later let her glance at a manuscript and immediately understand what era it came from, what dialect it was written in, and whether the ink and paper actually matched the story someone was trying to sell. After finishing her degree, she didn't head straight into the book trade. Instead, she moved to Japan for about a year to teach English, immersing herself in yet another language and culture before eventually returning home to Las Vegas. By her own account, she wasn't entirely sure what she wanted to do next. That uncertainty didn't last long. In the fall of 2007, Bauman Rare Books, one of the most respected antiquarian book dealers in the country, was opening a new gallery in Las Vegas, and they hired Rebecca to be part of it. She had no formal background in appraising or selling rare books before that point. What she had was an obsessive attention to detail, a scholar's patience, and the language skills to decode texts that would stump most people entirely. It turned out to be enough. Within a few years, she wasn't just working the floor. In 2010, she was promoted to manager of the Las Vegas Gallery, putting her in charge of handling and pricing items that included Shakespeare folios, leaves from the Gutenberg Bible, and first editions of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. This was not entry-level work. A single mistake in either direction, undervaluing a genuine treasure or authenticating a clever fake, could cost a client or the gallery an enormous amount of money and credibility. It was through this work in Las Vegas that she crossed paths with Rick Harrison. The city's world of rare books and antiques wasn't especially large, and Rick, who had been running the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop since the late 1980s, needed someone who genuinely understood old documents when unusual paper items came through the door. According to Rebecca's own account of how it happened, Rick approached her directly and asked if she'd be willing to appear on the show. She said that she and her employer initially turned the offer down. Being featured on a reality television show wasn't an obvious move for a gallery trying to maintain a certain reputation in the rare book world, and appraising items on camera for a general audience is a very different exercise than doing it quietly for serious collectors. But Rick kept asking, and eventually they agreed to give it a try. She has described the whole experience with a certain amount of good humor, calling it the cherry on top of a job she already loved. Since working for a gallery, as well regarded as Bauman, was already something close to a dream position for someone in her field. She made her first appearance on Pawn Stars during Season 4 in 2011. From the start, she stood out. Where a lot of expert guests on shows like this play up the drama, gasping over big numbers or building suspense before a reveal, Rebecca's delivery was almost the opposite. She'd examine a document with total focus, quietly explain the historical context in plain language anyone could follow, and then state a number W, without much fanfare at all. Whether that number was thrilling or disappointing, it became her signature. She could tell someone their supposed Civil War rarity was actually a worthless modern reproduction, or that a dusty box of old paper was secretly worth tens of thousands of dollars, and her tone barely changed either way. Audiences responded to that steadiness. In a genre of television built on manufactured tension, she offered something closer to an actual expert doing actual expert work, and it made her one of the more trusted and memorable recurring faces on the series. One of her most talked about appraisals came in 2014, when a man brought an 1842 5th edition of the Book of Mormon into the shop. It's a genuinely significant item in the world of religious and American historical texts. That particular edition is considered the scarcest printing of the book, since it was the final one produced under Joseph Smith's direct oversight before his death, and it's also the only edition to credit him without the usual junior suffix, since his father had passed away by the time it was completed. Rebecca walked through the history carefully on camera, laying out the persecution and turmoil of the early Latter-day Saint movement with real precision, and ultimately appraised the book at $40,000. After the usual back and forth of negotiation that the show is known for, Rick ended up purchasing it for $24,000. It made for compelling television precisely because it was true. A genuinely rare, historically loaded artifact, correctly identified and fairly negotiated. There was no theft involved, no federal investigation, and no scandal attached to the transaction. It was simply Rebecca doing her job well on an object whose value came from real, verifiable history rather than manufactured drama. Over her time on the show, she became known as the person to call whenever anything made of paper came through the door, whether that meant historical letters, old maps, or first editions of major literary works. She built a reputation for being able to spot forgeries that would fool less experienced eyes, checking things like ink composition, paper aging, and the subtle inconsistencies that separate an authentic centuries-old document from a clever fake. That kind of expertise doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from years of physically handling thousands of real historical items until you develop an instinct for what's off, even before you can articulate exactly why. Despite becoming one of the show's most popular recurring experts, and notably, its only regular female specialist for a long stretch, Rebecca's appearances gradually became less frequent after the mid-2010s. There's a much simpler explanation for this than any of the online rumors suggest. Her actual career, the one she'd built with Bauman Rare Books, required her to move. She left Las Vegas to take on a larger role managing the company's central operations from Philadelphia, overseeing catalog production and helping acquire entire libraries for the firm. Being on the other side of the country made it far harder to simply pop into a Las Vegas pawn shop whenever an interesting book turned up. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a falling out with the show. It was a geography problem created by her own career growth. She continued to appear occasionally when she was back in Las Vegas, keeping her tally of episodes climbing into the dozens over the years. But the constant presence she'd had in the show's early seasons naturally faded as her professional life pulled her elsewhere. From Philadelphia, her path took her to Brooklyn, where she joined Honey and Wax booksellers. It was during this period, around 2015, that she partnered with fellow bookseller Heather O'Donnell to create something that would end up mattering just as much to her legacy as any appraisal she'd ever done on television. They launched the Honey and Wax Book Collecting Prize, an annual award of $1,000 given to a woman under the age of 30 who had assembled the most original and compelling personal book collection, regardless of how expensive or rare the individual items were. The idea came from something Rebecca had noticed throughout her career. Plenty of women were passionate, knowledgeable collectors in their own right, but far fewer of them were comfortable calling themselves collectors at all, a label that had long carried a certain old boys club content narrative storytelling, and it found a genuinely receptive audience among readers who enjoyed history told with a bit of wit rather than dry.